Welcome to our Sound for Video session, the first of 2021. Hope you all had a good holiday season and a happy new year. So thanks for joining us today. We have a good bit of things, a good lot of things to cover today. So let's jump over to our agenda and we'll get started right there. First up, I just want to talk a little bit about Bioluminous. And in fact, Scott's here today. I saw you in the chat there, Scott, so thanks for joining. We're going to just take a quick look at some of the things that he sent over that we'll be testing out here in the next little bit. And actually, let's jump over to that right now. All right, so first of all, thanks, Scott, for the card. Scott was kind enough to, he does some 3D printing here, and he put together this little coaster. He said, I think you need this coaster for your live shows, and indeed, we're going to put that to use here today. So thanks to Scott and Tatiana for that. Let me just kind of talk about or show some of the things here. Scott, I actually have not put these on my devices yet, but let me just show folks here a couple of the things. So first of all, here we have, these are all 3D printed items of various sorts, well, for the most part. And let me just kind of bring these down here so we can show some of them. Here, for example, we have some replacement color knobs for the Mix Pre. And that can make it a little easier to identify the various knobs, keep them straight. So that can be really helpful. So we'll be putting those on my Mix Pre here in the next little bit. Here, for example, are just some more kind of generic XLR TRS combo input protection caps. So those just go over your XLR inputs just to kind of keep them a little better weather sealed. I'm getting some glare there. And then you can release them, and they've got this little lip here that makes it easy to pull them back out. For the Mix Pre users among us, here's some more little Lego tires that you can put on the headphone encoder. Sound Devices Mix Pre headphone encoder sleeve. Making it just a little bit easier to operate that. Here we have replacement knobs for the Zoom F6. Put those here in the frame. So again, different colors just to make it easier to quickly identify which channel you're adjusting there. And these look like they're bigger, and they also have a little pin on them like the Sound Devices, like on the more professional gear. So that's pretty cool. Here's a set for the Zoom F control. So you have both the faders for the slider faders and also for the gain knobs. So you can color code all of those as well. Nice little item there. And then a couple actually for lighting gear as well. These are both for the Aperture Nova. Here we have a mounting bolt, and these I have to look into again, but they also a cord clip here just to kind of manage the cable that comes off the back there. So in any case, we'll be putting those up, putting them to use and seeing how things go there, but kind of an interesting little set of things there. So let's go back to our agenda. Thank you, Scott, for sending those over. Very much appreciate that, and looking forward to putting them to use here. Just a quick update on the wireless course. I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is that Michael is our production sound mixer who we're working with, Michael Wynn, on the wireless course. He has been hired to shoot a new series or to do the mixing for a new series, and so he is actually occupied through June. So that's going to put a little bit of a damper on production of the course. I would say we're probably about halfway, maybe a third to halfway done with the course so far, but with his work there, it's probably going to be on hold until this coming summer. So good for Michael and his family, not so good for the course, but we'll get there. We're still committed to doing it, and Michael's still committed to doing it, so we're still going to head that direction. All right. We do have some things that we're going to be reviewing here in the next little bit here that I wanted to show you. And let's go ahead and switch back over to our overhead cam here. Can't fit the whole thing in the screen here, but this is the PodTrack P8 from Zoom. It's sort of a competitor, I would say, to the Rodecaster Pro. And we'll be probably doing a review of that in the next 2 weeks. So we'll see how that goes. I just got it the other day. I haven't powered it up yet even. But we'll be taking a closer look at that. And then another thing that we have in is the Zoom F2. And we got the Bluetooth version here. So there's a little basically pocket recorder or body pack recorder. And looking forward to putting that to use too. And we'll probably be comparing that, of course, to the Tentacle Sync Track E just to kind of see how it stacks up against that. I think the feature set's a little bit different. The Bluetooth version of this allows you to control it via app on your phone and to sync it with the Timecode Systems UltraSync Blue. Now, that UltraSync Blue is kind of I think a lot of people think it's more than it really is. It's really just kind of a Bluetooth. It has no physical output, so you can't connect it to a camera. So it's really only for syncing to like camera apps on your phone. So it's not quite the same thing. That's why, right off the bat, I kind of think that the Tentacle Tracky is a little bit more useful for the type of workflow I do. But if you're shooting on your phone or your tablet, then maybe this one could be more useful for you. So we'll have a review of those coming up in the coming weeks here. But just to let you know that we're definitely working that direction. All right. Back over to our agenda here really quickly. I had hoped to show this today, but we're not going to have time just because we have so many questions. But there is a new app that I've been beta testing. Thanks to Ike for pointing it out for me. There is a fellow who has a YouTube channel. His name is John Barker, and he makes his main job, of course, is doing, I think, mostly live events, either as a videographer or as a kind of a streaming mixer kind of guy. He manages that part of the production, but he's also a software engineer, and he's written a few apps that have been pretty interesting and pretty useful, I think. And he's working on a new one called H2R Gear. So he was kind enough to allow me to sign up as a beta tester on that. And what this app does, and again, apologies, we're not going to show it today, but I'm pretty excited about it. I put together my first little plan with it here recently. And what it allows you to do is plan out all of the gear that you're going to need for a live stream. And especially if you're going to do a production, like if you're doing some sort of keynote speech at a conference or something like that, it allows you to map it all out so you can figure out, okay, these are all the things I'm going to need for it, and this is how they're all going to interconnect. But then it also will make a packing list for you. So it will tell you all, how many cables of each type you're going to need, all the different gear you're going to need. It's pretty cool. It's a web-based app. So I'm pretty excited to talk. I don't think he wants us really showing the whole thing online right now, but he did say you could share your plans that you put together. So we'll bring up one of the plans here in the next few weeks here so you can see that a little more closely. So again, thanks to Ike for that. All right, let's jump into our Q&A because we have a lot of it today. So first of all, from Ferdinand, I'm using a MixPre 3 and the Earthworks SR314 mic. Congratulations, that's an awesome combination. I'm having some issues and not sure if my problem is common or not. I was making some videos for a certification. My setup is as follows: the mic to the MixPre and then the MixPre to Windows 10 via USB cable. I am recording with OBS. The issue is that in a couple of instances, the audio recorded by OBS comes out as robotic. The voice does not sound like me. Fortunately, the audio recorded in the MixPre is fine, and I swap the audio in post. When that happens, I power cycle the MixPre, and that takes care of the problem. I thought that there was maybe a driver issue or some compatibility issue between the MixPre and OBS. However, 2 days ago, I talked to a colleague via WebEx, and he was having a hard time hearing me. We recorded the conversation via the WebEx app, and sure enough, the robotic sound was back. I've not tested on my Mac to see if the issue is present there as well, but now I'm a little afraid to use my equipment during customer engagements. Have you heard of anyone else having this issue? So the first thing that strikes me is it sounds almost like a sample rate issue, like a mismatch between what the computer is using and what the MixPre is sending. So I don't know. On Windows, you have to use I think you're probably using an ASIO driver. And I don't know a lot about Windows and drivers, so I'm not sure on that front. But on the Mac, yes, you can change the sample rate. So what you're going to want to make sure is that you're using the same sample rate across apps. So and on the MixPre. So I would check OBS and make sure that it's at the same sample rate that your MixPre is set to. And then for WebEx, I'm 99% sure that on WebEx they're probably using 44.1 kilohertz. So switch your MixPre to that and see if you still have that problem. That would be the first thing I would check. If anyone else has other recommendations, definitely tell us in the chat there. But that's the first thing that comes to my mind as the most likely cause of that issue. So Ferdinand, hope that helps, and happy recording. All right. Next up from Chris N. I've been slowly adding gear to my toolkit, and I feel a little confused on my next step. I've settled on a couple of boom mics, the MKH416 and MKH50, and now I'm looking to add a few lavs. The problem I'm having difficulty answering is this. Is it more important to settle on a lav brand that generally cuts well with my Sennheiser mics, or would it be wiser to get a few different lav brands that could pair better with different voices of ever-changing talent? For reference, I really won't be adding any new boom mics to my kit for a while, and I already have a single B6. I assume you mean a Countryman B6. Any suggestions for my case? Well, you could go either way on that. The Sennheiser MKE2 definitely has a very bright sound, very much like their boom mics on the Sennheiser side, so that could make things easier for you. I wouldn't mind having one of those in my kit if I had those two boom mics, so that's definitely something worth considering. In my case, my main boom mic when I'm out recording, my two main boom mics are a Sennheiser MKH8050 if I'm doing indoor work, and then outdoor work, mostly a DPA 4017B. I have a whole slew of lavalier microphones, so I haven't necessarily taken special precaution to ensure that they cut well together, but what I do is I try to match the voice, figure out the timbre of the voice of the person we're laving up, and choose a mic that's going to work well for them. So if they have a darker voice, I'm going to use a brighter mic. If they have a brighter voice with a lot of sibilance, I'll probably use a mic that's not quite so bright. That's generally how I approach it. I'm really trying to just capture a pretty even frequency response with the lavs so that in post I can EQ them and match them to the booms. That's how I generally approach it. Although I think there are some mixers out there that really try to purchase their mics to match. The problem I have with that is that like the Sennheiser MKE2 is a great microphone, but for people with a lot of sibilance, I don't love the sound of it right out of the recording, but it would work. And you can always use a de-esser. So there are lots of different options. So I don't know. I guess the approach I have taken has not been that careful to match the lavalier microphones with the boom mics. And instead, I focus more on the voices and matching the lav mic to the voices of the people. So that's how I approach it. I think a case could be made the other way as well. So, okay, thanks for that, Chris. Next up from Rand, do you have a recommendation for how to apply software noise gate like from a DAW to the input of a video conferencing software like Zoom? Not on the software side, I haven't done that, but you can. On the Mac side, you can use something like Audio Hijack, and then you can insert one of those processors into Audio Hijack. It can be a little bit more complex if you're using your digital audio workstation, but you're going to have some sort of software routing application that can basically take the audio from one app and send it to another app within your computer. If you're on Windows, I'm not as familiar with those apps, but those apps exist on that side as well. But on the Mac side, Audio Hijack is one of the more obvious ones that are available. Some of the hardware manufacturers for audio interfaces, for example, ship software that allows you to do some of that routing as well. And on the Mac side, there's also the it's called Audio MIDI Setup, which allows you to do some of that configuration, not all of it. You're still going to need something like Audio Hijack, but that's the main thing to look into. I don't have that installed on this computer, so I can't show it here today, but that would be the first place I'd look. And you'll notice it just with Audio Hijack Pro, you can basically choose an app as an input, apply effects, and then choose another app as an output. So that should be able to let you do what you're trying to do here with Zoom. So thanks for that question, Rand. All right, would a Sound Devices MixPre 3.2 benefit a Zoom session that is recorded and played back? Or do Zoom internet formats and constraints make just about any computer and its sound card a reasonable solution? Well, I think there are some benefits to having a MixPre for a Zoom session, and one of those is that you'll have limiters, so you should be able to prevent any sort of clipping and distorting. So that's good. If you're looking for raw audio quality, Zoom does have the feature to enable what they call original audio, which is maddening to me. So basically what they're saying is, turn off all of our processing and we'll let you use your original audio. So so it can definitely benefit from that. You're still, it's still compressing it digitally. So, but I think it can definitely benefit from something like a MixPre 3. Definitely, if you're as clean as you can get the audio on the input, the better it's going to be at the final output. So there's some benefits still. All right. Next up from Mr. Curtis T. I'm in the market to buy another mic for my kit. I currently use the Rode NTG3 and the Audix SCX1. I have the Sanken COS 11D for wireless. I do a lot of indoor shooting for documentaries. I was thinking of getting the Sanken CSM1 or something like it. What's your thoughts and suggestions on what mic I should get next? I would encourage you to identify what problem you're trying to solve before you decide to buy a microphone. That's what I would do. The CSM1 is a fine microphone. It is, I think its polar pattern is not nearly as focused as, some of the other, like an NTG3. Well, actually, I've never tested those two head to head, so I don't know for sure. My general idea is the CSM1 is a kind of a shorter shotgun microphone, and it's really made for situations where you don't have a lot of space or you do want a slightly wider pickup. So I would be really clear, Curtis, about what you're trying to solve. What exactly gives you trouble right now, and what problems are you trying to solve? And I think that will drive you toward making a microphone choice that fits that situation and helps you solve that problem. So I would encourage you to give that a try, and then let's talk some more. You're welcome to email me anytime about that, about the details. Okay, next up from Les, Les says, how do you determine a suitable audio level for music during an interview clip, especially for a promotional video, so that it can still be heard without interfering with the legibility of the voice? I tend to hover music anywhere between minus 24 dB to minus 18 dB, but what sounds right on my headphones doesn't simply sound right through my computer speakers or smartphone. Do you simply judge by ear, or is there a more scientific approach you would recommend? Well, there are a couple things wrapped up in that question, and it's a good question. First of all, is monitoring is really important. So I think part of what's important to consider here is what your audience will be doing. And what I mean by that is what they'll be listening on. Is it mostly going to be on headphones? Is it mostly going to be on computer speakers? Is it going to be on more sophisticated playback systems with, near field monitors or proper surround, whatever it may be? First of all, that's part of it. But I think you kind of need to choose your reference point. I oftentimes, I've actually kind of changed my opinion on this a little bit. When I'm doing dialogue, the initial dialogue edit, I've been using headphones a lot more lately because there's more nuance you can pick up in these. Because you're basically eliminating the room from the listening experience. So it's a tough question. I would say this though, I wouldn't just attenuate the audio or the music. There are other things you can do. A very kind of crude thing you can do is use an EQ on the music and apply a cut, a very wide cut, where the dialogue is going to sit. So what you're doing is basically cutting into the music and making more space for the dialogue. And so that's going to, be somewhere between maybe around 1 kilohertz to, or maybe the point of the EQ would be about 2 kilohertz. Pull that down. You use your ears. This is where your ears are important, but it needs to be a very wide cut. That's sort of the crude way of doing it. You can also do it with side chaining with a dynamic EQ or something like that. That's a much more sophisticated way to do it. But it's that would be the more kind of elegant approach and the way that I think you're going to sound better. That way, the audience can still hear the music, but they're also very clearly able to hear the dialogue, which is critical for the piece that you're doing, a promotional piece. So those are the things that I would consider. I do think you need to get your playback sorted out, or your monitoring sorted out as well. I would never use, I think that using a phone and computer speakers are okay as a last check, but when you're actually monitoring and actually doing the mixing, I would use something more sophisticated than that, something better than that. And that's where I would rely on some good over-ear headphones and also some near-field monitors. So I think I've beaten that one to death. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay.
Some water.
And Emma says I need to drink some water. So we'll drink some water while we move to the next one. Les, I hope that's helpful for you. And we'll take our next question here. Okay, next up from Dean. Dean says, I am recording on a 32-bit float device, a Zoom F6, and I am capturing audio from a Sennheiser MKH416 shotgun connected, say, via a Deity Connect. I'm going to pause there. How are you getting a Sennheiser MKH416 connected to a Deity Connect? And it says, it almost sounds like you're using this as kind of a theoretical thing. There are probably ways to do it. You're going to have to add a phantom power supply somehow to that signal chain, but because I don't think the Deity Connect supplies phantom power. So that's the first thing to consider. If you've not purchased this gear yet and you're planning to do this, consider carefully. I'm not sure that you can use an MKH416 out of the box with a Deity Connect. All right, continuing on. Would you change anything about the way you set your transmitter and receiver levels on the Deity? You previously proposed one should start with plus 24 dB on the transmitter and set the receiver out to minus 9 dB. Yeah, so there was a friend who had emailed me who did a little bit of work kind of optimizing the noise floor performance of the Deity Connect system. And that was all based on using the included lavalier microphone. That was not based on using any other microphone. So that's the first thing to consider based on those numbers. Continuing on. Now, I did just take your Zoom F6 course, and I hear you, one still has to do their job and get the best signal to the Zoom. However, it would seem that if you were planning on adding some padding for audio surprises, loud noises, that you would after the standard approach to setting the Deity levels and lower them some so those devices have lesser chance of clipping at the slightest cost of gaining up your 32-bit file, but with a material upside of eradicating the chances of the Deity clipping. How would you balance this concept? Okay. Dean, critical thing here. The Zoom F6 and 32-bit float is really, from my point of view, really only useful with wired microphones. It is not, I mean, you can still use it, of course, but with a microphone like the Deity, or with a wireless system like the Deity Connect, that is where you have to be careful to optimize things so that you're not going to clip. Now, the good news about the Deity Connect is it does have a limiter built into it, so that's helpful. But yeah, you can certainly leave more headroom. The plus 24 dB on the transmitter and minus 9 dB on the receiver was just to optimize the overall noise performance of the Deity Connect system. Adjust it as necessary for your particular case. If someone has a really powerful voice, you're going to need to drop that plus 24 because you don't want to clip on the input. That's the most important thing. Don't clip on the input of your wireless system. So that would be the first thing I would consider in that whole setup that you've talked about there. Now, also, again, as I mentioned before, you're going to have to find some way to, if you are going to use a 416 through a Deity Connect, you've got some other problems you need to solve as well. And then Dean in the chat here, can you put up Dean's thing there? So Dean says that the Deity has a new boom plug. I don't know if that includes phantom power. Yeah. Oh, it's via their new wireless duo system. It does apparently support phantom power. Okay, anyway, so take some things there. I'm not aware of those changes, so those are some things to consider there. Thank you, Dean, for the input on that, and thank you. So hopefully that makes sense. In any case, with any wireless system, you have to be cognizant of the input level at the transmitter. That's the most important thing. So adjust that plus 24 down if you need to. If you've got a very powerful voice, adjust it down. That was based on, all those numbers were based on the included lavalier microphone with the original Deity Connect system. Okay, I feel like I'm beating these questions to death, so we're moving on. Next up, a question from Morgan here. My question is, when do you think is time to have a dedicated soundy with you on the job? Even if it's small, what are the factors you consider? Well, big part of it's budget. If it's a paid job, it depends on the budget. And so that's the first thing. But you should always have a soundy on. You always have a soundy. You're the soundy if you're a solo operator. So you need to care the most about sound of anyone else. But in terms of having a dedicated person, I think it really depends. You're going to have the budget to support it. That's really what it comes down to. So if you don't have the budget to support it, then you're kind of out of luck. Now, in my work, my video or my corporate video work, I've actually trained some people how to do some of this stuff. So, we're all employees of the same company. We get paid whether we're working on the videos or doing something else, whatever we're assigned to do. So in that case, I've actually, one of my friends was a DJ, and so he already understood basic, sound concepts. And so I had him operate the mixer on some of the things that we've done. Another guy who's a musician, so he had some familiarity with mixers, and so I showed him, sat him down and showed him how to operate the 888. So it just really depends on the situation, but I think budget's going to be the biggest constraining factor there. And then if there is no budget for a separate sound person, it's up to you. All right, next question here from Chuck. What would you recommend to improve the sound of a veteran interviewer, a 67-year-old male who has a thin voice due to vocal fold atrophy? We're using DPA lav mics for recording in studio, long-form interviews. We're not in a position to use our boom mics. We do have a DPA ear-worn mic he could use if you think that would be better. For audio post, we are using a Heil PR40 sent to a Sound Devices Mix Pre 6. We are applying a high-pass filter on the Mix Pre. We have not done anything yet on the voice recording. Chuck, I'm not really sure what you mean by you're using a separate mic, like a dynamic mic for post. Are you doing voiceover separately, or what is that for? I would assume you're not re-recording through the Heil. Not really clear on what that one's about. But anyway, on to the question, what would you suggest we do at the recording stage to address this problem? Then in post-production, what would be the best process for applying filters and compression to further improve voice quality? Well, I mean, you can't... I feel like that with my general philosophy, and this is not the philosophy that everyone has, but my general philosophy is that I would, just like when it comes to photographic retouching, there are different philosophies on that. And, some people take it, from my point of view, way too far. They make people into things that they are not. As when I was a photographer doing that kind of stuff, of course, I used... I did post-processing, of course, but my basic philosophy on that was I'm not here to change the people. I'm just here to make them look their best. So, for example, if someone had a blemish on their face, that's something that wouldn't be there in 2 weeks from now. I don't have any issue removing that. But I wasn't going to, and I would use a, kind of optimize which lens I use to make them, and maybe pose them in a way that didn't kind of emphasize their weight. But I wasn't going to go in post and use any tools that would, like warp tools that would make them look skinnier than they really are. That was just kind of where I personally drew the line. And I kind of apply that same approach to audio. I'm fine with EQ. And I don't know that I would try too hard to make this guy's voice sound perfect when it's not. But I would try to get the most flattering angle, if you will. So I would use a microphone that maybe has a little bit more bass pickup. So I think something like a Countryman B6 is going to have a little bit more of that than most of the DPA microphones. That would be my first thought. And then in post, EQ. The DPA microphones a lot of times they're very good. Well, the lavaliers, at least in my experience, generally are voiced to sound real life as possible. And that's, I think, a good approach. But if you're... Anyway, that short version, I would use EQ in post and get it to a point where it sounds its best, but I wouldn't try to change it too much from reality. Just make it sound good. Don't do any magical, surgical, superhuman kind of things to make it sound like he was 20 years old when he's not. So that would be my general approach. So thanks for the question, Chuck. Next up from Sang. I recently worked on a video for my church's virtual Christmas pageant. It was a spoken word style video with footage from about 20 kids recorded with various levels of thoughts and care given to the audio. As you can imagine, it was quite a challenge. It was quite challenging to make all the kids sound as good as possible. What I did was to edit all the videos first. Once I did all the edits for the video, I then went through each clip to adjust levels and do noise reduction and things like that. I was wondering how you might have approached working on something like this. Would it have been better to process the audio for the clips that I was going to use first? In your podcast mix walkthrough, I saw that you mixed down the final mix into a mono track and then did more processing. Is that something you would do for every type of project? for example, a project like mine, or is it specific to a podcast mix? And is there a way to do that in Fairlight? Okay, a few questions there. Yes, that I actually had a similar type thing for my day job recently. Actually, it was earlier it was probably late summer, early fall. One of our customers won an industry award, and several of the employees around the company where I work recorded on their phones little snippets congratulating them, and then I put it all together. And I approached it exactly like you did. I did the edit first, adjusted the level so that we were all kind of in the same ballpark on all the different clips, went back and did noise reduction where necessary, and then I bounced out the entire thing to a new mix. And then from there, I just did the final touches. And by final touches, I mean mainly loudness normalization. So that's really all I tried to do there. And yes, you can certainly do that in Fairlight. You can bounce out the mix, mute everything else, bring in the final mix, do whatever you need to do to that for loudness optimization. And whether that's maybe some compression and then boosting the level, hitting your target within Fairlight, and then you can export from there. So that's exactly how I did it. And sounds like you and I are on the same wavelength there. So good question. All right, let's go. Emma's over here holding a bug.
Put it on the overhead.
She wants us to put this on the overhead. So this is a kind of bug that we get here in Utah. It's called a box elder bug. So you want to take that outside for us?
Be right back.
So Emma's going to take that outside. She'll be right back, but we're going to go back to the question and answer in the meantime. All right, next from Johan. 2 questions from Johan. First of all, gain versus faders. I understand that they are working on different parts of the signal chain. Gain is at the preamp stage and faders at the recording stage. But why do you need both? Why not only work with gain to do the mixes? All right. Let's see. Let's address that one here first. So here's the way I like to think of it when you're talking about a field recorder, at least. In the case of a field recorder, the gain is the amplification that's applied to the signal that's coming in from the microphone on each channel. And then for each channel, you also have a fader. And what that fader does is it defines how much of that channel gets sent to the mix. That's how I like to think of it. I think it makes it a little clearer. Here you said that the faders affect the recording stage. It affects the recording stage of the mix, but not the recording of the isolated channel. So the idea here, from my point of view, is that when you're doing field mixing for film and video, if you can, it's best, it depends on the production. Sometimes they don't even want to mix, but anyway, so if you can, it's nice to provide a mix if you have a quick turnaround piece. So if it's something that needs to be produced and sent out quickly, then getting that mix right is really useful. And I think of the faders really as a way to balance out the levels of the different people. As long as your gain staging is right, I generally, while I'm recording, only change the faders. Now, if somebody is one of those people that during the sound check, they're just kind of talking very quietly and they don't say much, and then as soon as you start recording, they start talking really, really loud, then you may have to adjust their gain. But once you've got that sorted out, then it's really the faders, and the faders are meant to be the kind of the quick way to balance out the mix overall. And so that's how I generally approach it, Johan. So that hopefully that makes sense. That's why, and that's how I think of those two things differently. And generally, again, while recording, once the recording is started, I prefer not to have to mess with the gain if I've done a good job with the gain staging. And then I just use the faders from there. All right, moving on to his next question here. Digital limiters, when are they ever useful? The damage is already done to the data since clipping occurs at the digital to, I think you mean the analog to digital conversion stage. Is this just a gimmick? That is a fantastic question. It is a gimmick from the standpoint, it is a gimmick and it's not a gimmick. And let me explain a little bit more. It is a gimmick from the standpoint that it's not going to save you on your input stage. It's not going to prevent any sort of saturation or overloading of the analog input. So no, that's where digital limiters are not useful. However, digital limiters are still potentially useful. And where they are useful is if you're applying some sort of effects, and it depends on how it's implemented overall. But for example, the A10 Mini, which we're using, A10 Mini Pro we're using here today for this live stream, it has some processing. It does have a digital limiter at the end of the chain. What that digital limiter at the end of the chain can be useful for is that if any of your processing pushes the audio levels to a point where it may get too loud, that digital limiter can save you there. So it's not a total gimmick, and it does have its uses, but it's not going to save you on the analog input stage. So that's the kind of distinction that I would make as far as digital limiters versus analog limiters are concerned. Now, we've started to see different implementations of digital limiters, and now some of, for example, Zoom on their F series implements what they call digital hybrid limiters. And basically what they're doing is that when you set the input gain on an input and you turn the hybrid limiter on, without telling you, it's actually dropping that input level by 10 dB, therefore buying you 10 dB of additional headroom. And then they apply the limiter in post. So if the audio input signal after it goes through the converter would not clip, if they add that 10 dB back, they'll go ahead and add that 10 dB back. But if it would clip, then they don't add the 10 dB back for those samples. So it's kind of an interesting way of doing it. The only problem with that approach is that you do potentially lift the noise floor. So it's an interesting approach. And in that case, it actually can help with the input stage, because technically what they're doing is they're turning the gain down for you. So anyway, those are some thoughts on that. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's go to our next question here. Next from Joe. This is not so much a question. This is actually something that Joe has shared with me and now is ready to share with the audience here. He put together, well, let me give you some background on Joe, what he does. He does a lot of recordings of firearms and other explosions. And he's been working out a system where he can sync remote cameras without using timecode. And so he's put together a little description video here that talks about how he does that. I put this link down in the description below. So if you are interested in checking that out, there are some things there as well. All right, thanks for that, Joe. Moving to our next question. Petri, I just tested my newly bought Chef's MK41 with a boom pole and was surprised by how much handling noise it picks up. What can I do to get a clean sound using a boom pole? My boom pole doesn't have internal cables. All right, there are a number of things that are important there. Not having internal cable is okay. That's not a problem necessarily. I prefer not to work that way. I do prefer the internal cable, but you can still work with an external cable and not get handling noise. The biggest factor is going to be the shock mount and the boom pole itself, and there's some technique in there as well. But you have got to use a quality shock mount. Absolutely, positively, no questions asked. The clip that comes with the MK41 is not good enough. That's only okay for statically boomed mics. So if it's on a stand, if you're going to be on a boom pole, you have got like a handheld boom pole, you've got to get a good shock mount. And I would look at the Rycote Envision shock mounts, and I would get the kind that has two separate lyres, not the kind where the two lyres are connected to each other. And the reason for that is the two separate lyres do a good job of isolating any sort of movement. Now, you also need to learn some technique as far as boom operating. I would recommend the Sound Speeds channel on YouTube. Alan Williams is a professional boom operator, and he's got lots of information on, technique and things of that nature. So he has a series over there. If you look through the playlists on his channel, you'll see that there are some specific videos where he talks about the technique for operating the boom pole. Now, I have noticed that some boom poles transfer a lot more sound than others. I actually reviewed the Really Right Stuff boom poles a little over a year ago, I think it was, and they transferred a lot more noise. I was not impressed. They're really nice boom poles, but they seem to transfer a lot of noise, and I think it had to do with the material, the carbon fiber they were using for the pole itself. So, in any case. All right, so thanks for that. I hope that was helpful input. Okay, next up to Philip. I was wondering if you had any recommendations for some sort of improvised IFB or monitor feed solution for directors in case you find yourself caught off guard by a spontaneous request for it on set and without having any context available. I was thinking of transmitting a single feed to Village and then using a stationary powered headphone splitter that people can plug into. Philip, that's a good idea, actually. I have actually made it a practice now to specifically ask this question before a production. I think it's really important to have that sorted out, because I have shown in my earlier days as a mixer, I showed up to a gig. It was probably I think the entire piece, it was a short piece. And I think they had maybe a $20,000 budget. And I was basically hired the night before. And I showed up, and then later on some producers showed up, and the director came over and said, "Hey, can we get some headphones for these producers?" And I said, "I don't have any headphones," which is a really bad spot to be in. You should never be in that spot. But I always make it a point to very specifically ask what's required in terms of, headphones for other crew members. So that's one thing you can do. I think your idea is a good one. You could use a single wireless feed and then feed that over to a headphone splitter, and then, people can plug into that. That's one that's pretty easy and fairly affordable to have on hand. A couple of years ago, Greg Palmer and I talked on one of these Sound for Video sessions. He talked about using a Sennheiser G3 system as a camera hop, but you could potentially use it as a headphone hop as well, like this. Or you could invest in a single Comtech or other IFB wireless system, and then also have the headphone splitter. So that gives you some flexibility. Hopefully that answers the question. If anyone else has other ideas too, definitely let us know. I've heard of people using things like Rode Wireless Go's to do headphone feeds. So that's a pretty inexpensive way to do it as well. If you've got some of those on hand, you could do that as well. All right. Let's see. We have another question. We do have another question. Here is from Dick. I need another drink of water. 1 second. All right. I have a question about the use of the Earthworks Audio SR314. Hey, that's the second one today. For live streaming. I know you love it and give it a very pleasant, rich sound, I think more clear than the Shure mic. I think he's referring to the Shure SM7B. I now use the following signal path: a Shure SM7B mic into a DBX 265S. I don't know if that's supposed to be a 286S or I'm not sure. And the signal chain that go into a MixPre 10T first gen, and that goes into an A10 Mini Pro ISO audio input. Then I stream direct to YouTube, but most of the time I use this for Microsoft Teams meetings. I use the virtual camera and sound from the ATEM that run on a Mac Pro. I do some EQ, gate, and de-essing on the DBX, but there's no other processing involved. The gate is for room noise reduction if I'm not speaking. The room has no proper sound treatment other than a sound blanket hanging behind me, which is, I would correct you on that, is proper sound treatment of some sort. The room is normal bedroom, study room on the first floor. Questions. Can I use an SR314 instead of the Shure SM7B in a not good treated room? I know the Shure is more forgiving about room noise. All right. First of all, I would say, yeah, you can. It's a condenser microphone, so it's really going to be about how you use it. If you are going to use it up nice and close, then I think you're going to experience an effect similar to the SM7B. But if you're going to work back from it a little bit, you will notice it pick up a little bit more room ambiance, a little bit more room sound. So it really depends on how you're going to use it. But I think it could be a fine choice. And the fact that you have at least one sound blanket in there is a good sign. So while it doesn't have, these type of bass traps necessarily, you certainly do have some treatment. And another thing that a lot of people don't consider, if you've got a hard floor, put a blanket on the floor. It's generally not in the frame. And it's something you can pick up as soon as you're done, but that can make a world of difference in terms of the overall room sound. So that's something to consider. Next up from Dick, if I want to use the SR314, must I change the signal path? No, I don't think so, not at all. And again, I'm not really clear. I think you meant a DBX 286S, which is a channel strip. And I think we've talked about that before, Dick. So you wouldn't need to change. You'll need to adjust the settings a little bit to kind of optimize it. Always use your ears. That's really the question. If you need to, do you need to change anything? Use your ears. And if you want to send me an audio sample, I can provide some suggestions on what things you might want to consider as well. And then finally, any other suggestion about my signal path are also welcome to improve my sound further. No, I would say If anything, if you do have a hard floor, I would put a blanket on the floor. Because that's like a really easy one. Like that's a really easy thing to do. And it also makes it makes it, it's nicer to walk on with your bare feet. So hopefully that helps, Dick. Happy recording and streaming and meeting. All right, next up from Justin. I had a question about the Acon Digital Extract Dialogue plugin. I'm considering buying it, but wondered if you had any thoughts on it or were aware of any shortcomings with the plugin. Is saving up for RX8 the best option? Well, it depends on what you need. Acon Digital Extract Dialogue is excellent based on the tests I've done. It's very much like the RX8 Dialogue Isolate, which is incredibly powerful. It depends on what you need. If you don't need all the other stuff in RX, then I wouldn't have any reservations about the Extract Dialogue from Acon Digital. But if you do need a more general kind of cleanup suite of plugins, then I think RX is definitely worth saving up for. So I've chosen RX because I need all the other stuff too. But if you like to do your shopping one plugin at a time, then the Acon can make perfect sense as well. So there are a number of things in RX8 that I rely on a daily basis, practically. The phase rotation I think is really, really awesome. The dehumming is, it's just a set of all these different things that I use a lot. Dialogue Isolate is great. Also, if you need to do, I like the loudness controls in there too. That makes it a lot easier to get the loudness where you need it. And there's just a lot of things. So for me, it was worth it to save up and go for RX8. And of course, Extract Dialogue wasn't out at the time that I originally invested in RX8 or RX. My first version of RX was 4, I think, actually. So they've extracted a lot of money from me, speaking of extraction. But I've never regretted it. I've always found it to be incredibly useful, especially for the corporate video. There's so much garbage and noise and so many things you're fighting against. And even when I'm there as the soundy doing the recordings, there's still stuff that needs to be cleaned up. So I would say the RX8 has been a really good investment. So, all right. I think that's the last question. That's it. And we actually have some time left. That's awesome. So what I'm going to try to do, Emma, if you could go through the chat for us and see if there's anything there. I'm going to see if I can pull up H2R gear and just see. And see if I can at least share one of my plans. Actually, I'll pull it up here and share it here. Thanks for your patience here while we pull this up. I don't want to, let's go into the plan. I have my little A10 mini. Let's share the plan. Let's copy the link. How do I get it to my iPad now? Message it to myself? What would you all do? What would you do, Emma?
Message.
She would message it to herself, so I'll message it. Okay. Can you message yourself?
Yeah. With a phone number.
Oh, with a phone number.
Alan Moore's doing roast taters.
Oh, what?
Roast potatoes.
Oh, okay. Roast potatoes. Yeah, good. How do I'm going to actually message it to you and me because I can't. Danny's going to get this and she's going to go, what? That'll be funny. I'll be interested to see what she says. Okay. Then let's see if I can, whoops, pull that. Oh, here we go. Pull that up. See if it comes up. Opening rack cases. Oh, yes. Awesome. Okay. Yeah. If you can switch over to this. Okay. So here is H2R gear and just one of the kind of really quick, whoops. Trying to see if there's a way to change the zoom. This is read only on this particular case. Oh, there we go. Okay. So what I've done here is I've put together, this is kind of just a mock-up of the setup we're using today. It's not exactly the same as this, but it's pretty close. We have our SQ5 mixer. Today we only have a single mic going through it, but the reason I use that is that I've got a lot of inputs there. So if we're doing mic comparisons, I can hook up a whole bunch of different mics and switch between them. And what's further, let me just go ahead and do this. This is kind of cool. It'll say disconnected. I can control the SQ5 from right here, which is very cool as well. So even though it's sitting on the other side of the room here, I have full control of it here, and I can, go into my inserts. I've got the EQ. Oh, what's going on there? That shouldn't be. Oh, I need to choose this channel here, but I've got my high pass filter. We've got gates, inserts, EQs, compressor, so on and so forth. So I can control everything right here, which is really awesome. So, whoops, let's go back to, was it here? Yeah, here. Okay. All right, so here's our 2-cam setup. So my main camera is the C200, and you can see here the audio from the SQ5 is coming out. It's coming out of the SQ5 into the XLR input on the C200. You can see our iPhone over here on the right-hand side is coming directly into the mic 1 input. And then on our Panasonic GH5, that's our overhead camera, is coming into HDMI 2. We've got a MacBook Pro coming into HDMI 3, which is using the chat overlay, which Aaron packaged up and is available as a Chrome plugin now. Thank you for that, Aaron. I think I saw Aaron here just a few minutes ago. So thanks very much for that. And it's a staple for us. We absolutely love it. Does a really nice job. And then I'm showing here a Mac Pro. Actually, in this case today, we're using an iPad as opposed to the Mac Pro plugged into HDMI input 4. So the way this works on H2R gear is that all the inputs are on the top of the device and all the outputs are on the bottom. So you can see here on the ATEM, for example, we've got all the HDMI and mic inputs on the top, and then the HDMI and USB and Ethernet outputs on the bottom. So on the HDMI out, I do have a little 7-inch field monitor hooked up. That's what Emma is monitoring on with audio. So she has a headphones plugged into that HDMI monitor. So she's hearing the program audio there. It's also showing the program output, of course. And then we actually do have, it's not shown on this diagram here today, but we actually have, I don't have a way to put this on the overhead camera right now, but I do have a decimator. So the output, technically what's happening today, the HDMI output is not going directly to that monitor. It's going into a decimator, which is a scaler and a multi-output device. So I've got an HDMI input onto that. I've got an HDMI output going to the small field monitor, but I also have an SDI output going to the big monitor that's sitting over by Emma. So we have a little bit more complex setup there. And then we are streaming directly via Ethernet. That's going into a switch that I have here out to the internet from there. So that's how we have things set up. Now, this is not that, this is a simple setup here, to be honest. Like, this is not that big of a deal. Anyone can figure this out. If they sit down and write it down on a piece of paper, that's cool. But what this does here, and you don't have the feature here. You have to actually go to the website where you can put all this together. But there's a button where you can say, basically, show me my packing list. Show me everything I need to bring to make this production work. And it will list out all of the gear, but also all the different types of cables that you'll need. You notice here, for example, the XLR cables are shown in green, and the HDMI cables are shown in black. The Ethernet cable output is shown in blue. So it can identify all the different types of cables that you're going to need as well. So it's a really neat kind of concept. And as soon as you start working on bigger productions, this will be super helpful. So I'm glad we got to show that, actually. Any questions about that? Curious. Anyway, okay, so let's go back to the chat here. Emma has got us covered on the chat. Any questions that we need to address? She's looking right now. And Boulder Surfer says that my background is a little more beigey.
We don't have the color lights on.
Oh, yeah, stand by. Let's fix that. Sorry about that. Thanks for the tip on that. Let me actually just say something about that. That's not just because I want it to look techno. It's there's actually a color theory reason for that. That provides color contrast. So it is a cool blue. If you look on the color wheel, it's basically opposite of the skin tones. And so that's why I personally do it, just add some interest and some color contrast to the overall image. So Thanks very much, Boulder Surfer, for reminding me to turn on the color contrast lights. Okay, we have a question here. Is there a good solution for denoise, PC fans, and HVAC that can be used for live streaming and video chat programs? I can use Isotope RX for post, but not sure about live, or maybe an expansion noise gate. Well, there are a lot of different options. If you're looking for software, if you're on a PC and you have an RTX card from NVIDIA, there's RTX Voice. So that's one option. RTX Voice is clever and interesting, and it can do a good job. I find, though, that if you have to close mic, so if you're booming a mic, it doesn't seem to work quite as well. You do have to be pretty close up on the mic for it to be most effective. And in fact, that's what I saw a lot of the tech reviewers doing. They were like up on the mics like this, and they had leaf blowers in the background and all sorts of crazy stuff going on. And they were like, wow, mind blown. And yeah, that is pretty impressive. But if you're working from a mic that's, like 12 inches or more away, it's not quite the same effect. So, and then when you turn it up really pretty aggressively, it starts to really cut into the dialogue quite a bit. You sound very muffled, and you lose a lot of the high end and the articulation and stuff like that. So that is an option. Another option, as we mentioned before, you could use something like you're on a PC. I don't know what the equivalent on a PC is, but on a Mac, you can use Audio Hijack, and then you could apply any sort of software gate in there if you have a software plugin, expander gate. So those are some options there as well. Okay. For dialogue editing, would you always normalize first? No, I would not. Not always. The main thing when you're mixing, when you're dialogue editing and mixing on that first stage, I'm just trying to get things to sound naturally in the same realm. That's really all I'm trying to do. And in fact, a lot of times, if you have a really track heavy count, like if you're working on a proper film, a lot of times I find that I need to pull the gain down some because once you mix everything together, if it's a really busy mix, all that's additive. And so you're going to get clipping even if none of the individual tracks are clipping. So it really depends on the mix. A lot of times what I will do is I might normalize mono dialogue tracks to -27 just to kind of get them in their same ballpark. And then I'll use my ear to kind of adjust them from there as necessary. If I have a dialogue scene, for example, with 2 actors or something like that. So no, you don't necessarily have to normalize. In our course, we do that to some extent, the Adobe Audition course. We did that to some extent, largely for the visual of the waveform, just so you could see the waveform, because I wanted you to be able to see the waveform as we were processing it and seeing how it changed the waveform, in addition to how the sound changed. So that's if you're referring to that, that's why we did some normalization there as a first stage. Again, just so that you could see that waveform. So hopefully that helps. All right, another question: what would you guys recommend, timecode or Scratch Audio Sync? Well, we need more context. Whenever I'm working on a film, I do bring my timecode gear. The groups that I've worked with up till now, some of them just aren't interested in timecode. They don't know how it works. They're scared of it. And so I'm not going to push it on them. But for those that do, there are some groups that I've worked with, a director, Austin Berenier, and DP Levi Whitney. We've used it now. They're totally committed to timecode. They love it. So it really depends. I think you need to definitely slate, even if you are using timecode, by the way. I do have a pretty strong opinion on that, because if something gets messed up, you have another fallback plan. But for my YouTube videos, I don't bother with timecode. I just clap is all I do. So, and then we have the scratch audio on the camera. I'm curious what other people say about this. What's the difference between short shotgun and supercardioid mics for booming indoors? What are the best uses for each? I have a good regular shotgun microphone for outdoor dialogue. Well, I think the difference is the principle by which they operate. So a shotgun microphone, as you well know, has an interference tube. Let's just pull one out here. Oh, that was open. Oh. Emma, if you could go to the overhead cam for us, please. Okay, so shotgun microphone. Here's the DPA. Interference tube design, as you can see, has all these slits along the barrel of the microphone. This is a short shotgun. Well, this is sort of a, this has basically the same effect as what I would call a medium shotgun mic. There's a more traditional, let me just pull out the MKH 416 here. Here's the 416 with its interference tube design. This is longer, as you can see. Again, I think this would typically be referred these days to a medium shotgun microphone. Here's the DPA in relation. So it has, the DPA has less interference tube surface area. Well, surface length at least. But the overall, this actually is more isolating. The Sennheiser is more isolating, so it has a more focused polar pattern, I would say. Now, with that said, let's talk about your question a little bit more. So, for indoor booming, you can use a short shotgun mic for indoor booming. That's perfectly fine. In fact, I think that's really how Deity markets their S-Mic 2S. And I guess it probably is a good choice for if someone can only have one microphone, one boom mic. It's a pretty versatile choice. The trick with, and you should all try this if you haven't already. If you have a shotgun microphone, try talking around it while you're indoors, especially in a really reverberant space, and see what happens as you talk around kind of usually somewhere in this area here. Like if you're off about 45 degrees, you can sometimes get this weird warbling phase effect, kind of comb filtering, really strong comb filtering effect. And that's the main reason why a lot of people say don't use shotgun microphones indoors. I found that you generally don't run into that problem quite as much with the shorter shotgun microphones, but that's a non-issue with anything else. With like for example, any of the super cardioid mics, you'll never have that experience really. Not the same effect as you do. And what's happening in that case is it's like the audio is coming into the interference tube and the front of the mic at the same time, or just offset enough so that it directly interferes with itself, and it makes a really weird kind of effect. So that's the main thing for argument for not using one of these. And sometimes it can be from reverberation as well. So if it's a super reverberant room, you can get this effect, and it doesn't happen very often, but if the sound bounces off a wall and comes into the interference tube, close to the same time that it's happening here, and we're talking just milliseconds difference, you can get that comb filtering effect as well. So, so back to your question. What's the best use for each? I think again, if I almost always prefer to use a supercardioid indoors. It's easy. I don't have to run it. I don't run the risk of getting that comb filtering issue. And typically, another thing about, especially like mics, well, no, this one's actually pretty good at that. Some of the shotgun microphones have a long tail on the back. In other words, they actually pick up a little bit more at the back than they do at the sides. And sometimes that's not what you want, just depends. You have to use your ears to determine that. But that's generally at least my thinking as far as when to use a hyper or a supercardioid versus a shotgun design. So it's really the operating principle. The supercardioids don't have this interference tube really. They might have a couple of vents, but it's not to the same extent as this, and you're really much less likely to run into that comb filtering issue. Okay. Again, beat that one to death. Go to the next one. When you're working with audio on your computer, do you use the computer's headphone output, or do you recommend using an interface like a Zoom F8? Well, you have to use what you have. So if you've got the option, there are better headphone amplifiers on audio interfaces usually. So that's usually what I use. But when I'm mobile, there have been times when I've used, just the headphone output on my Mac, and that's fine. The headphone out on the Macs are pretty decent generally, unless you're using like audiophile headphones, 600 ohm impedance headphones, but otherwise they're generally okay. If you really want to get, some of us are not going to notice a huge difference. That's, I think, the short version. I keep beating these questions to death. All right, any other questions for today? Okay. Gustavo, I have a question. I'm looking to buy a pair of headphones for mixing, and so far I came across the Bear Dynamic DT880 600 ohm and the Sennheiser 560s. Which one would you recommend? I haven't used the Sennheisers. The DT880s I have used. I don't think they're 600 ohm. I think I'm using the version I have. I think they're the 250 ohm version, and those have been good. If you do go with the 600 ohm version, you're going to need that's where you are going to need a pretty substantial headphone amplifier. So I wouldn't go with the 600 ohm unless you've got a really beefy, really high quality headphone amp to work with it. So be careful there. The 560s, I don't know. Has anyone else used the Sennheiser 560s? I haven't used those, so I'm not familiar with them. The 880s, of course, are they call them a semi-open back design. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but the idea is you'll get a kind of a wider stereo image. And I think the Sennheisers are probably open back, if I'm not mistaken, on those. So sound off in the chat. Let us know, people. Thanks, Gustavo. Is that it? All right. Emma says we have to end. She said we have to go home now. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. I hope you had a really good start to your new year. And I hope that you are able to make some really great recordings. So get out there, make those great recordings, and we'll talk to you again soon.